Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Good to see you all here, and good to see you back. Well, we've been discussing the last few weeks this writing of Dogen Zenji's, the Genjo Koan, and we've sort of been going through passage by passage. I think each passage has something special to say, and it's clear that Dogen was careful in his choice of words. This passage we're discussing today starts off, enlightenment is like. So it's clearly about enlightenment. Now, what do we mean by enlightenment? There's just a lot of confusion about that and various opinions out there. But I think one thing we can conclude from this work, the Genjo Koan, is that Dogen thought it was helpful and important to write to this layman who had been studying with him for a short time and try to explain in various ways, shed light on enlightenment. Now, if enlightenment were something that only affected one individual every few thousand years, it wouldn't really make much sense to spend all this time worrying over it and writing about it to this layman who's going back to his village to carry on his life. So I conclude that Dogen must have thought that enlightenment was an experience, a way of being in the world, a way of seeing the world that was not all that uncommon. Something that is familiar to most people. So this little section is about enlightenment using the image of the moon. And what I'd like to do first, I'm going to just read it first. And I would encourage you to just, instead of trying to figure out what it means, just let the words flow over you and see if you can identify any feeling tone. Does it arouse any particular feeling as you listen to it? Enlightenment is like the moon reflected on the water. The moon does not get wet, nor is the water broken. Although its light is wide and great, the moon is reflected even in a puddle an inch wide. The whole moon and the entire sky are reflected in dewdrops on the grass, or even in one drop of water. Enlightenment does not divide you, just as the moon does not break the water. You cannot hinder enlightenment, just as a drop of water does not hinder the sky. The depth of the drop is the height of the moon. Each reflection, however long or short its duration, manifests the vastness of the dewdrop and realizes the limitlessness of the moonlight in the sky. So, I'm going to do an experiment and just ask you to, if you have access to that little chat button down there, if you could just, without thinking about it too much, just volunteer if there's any feeling tone, any feeling arises just listening to that passage. The chat button is down there right in the middle of the menu at the bottom. Is there anything that pops up? I'll give you a minute. So wonder, peaceful, settling ease, awe. Yeah, these are some things that might come up with this. Vastness. Yeah. Comfort. Trust in a supportive universe. Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you very much. So, yeah, I think let's go through the text a little bit in more detail. With some of that in mind. Comfort, peaceful, vastness. The whole passage seems to be kind of a reassurance in a way. It's as if Dogen is trying to deflect fear. So he starts off, enlightenment is like the moon reflected on the water. The moon does not get wet, nor is the water broken. Although its light is wide and great, the moon is reflected even in a puddle an inch wide. The whole moon and the entire sky are reflected in dewdrops on the grass, or even in one drop of water. Enlightenment does not divide you, just as the moon does not break the water. You cannot hinder enlightenment, just as a drop of water does not hinder the moon and the sky. The depth of the drop is the height of the moon. Each reflection, however long or short its duration, manifests the vastness of the dewdrop and realizes the limitlessness of the moonlight in the sky. So, the image of, the poetic image of the moonlight, of the moon reflected on water is not original with Dogen. It goes back many centuries before Dogen and is used in various ways, not always the same way, interestingly, but there are a number of poems from China that Dogen would have been familiar with that use this image. Dogen tends to take an image and just make something of it, sort of use it creatively on his own. So what is the moon here? One thing that's fairly consistent throughout all of the uses of this metaphor is that the moon is a stand-in for Buddha mind, empty mind, the Dharma, enlightenment, thusness, as it is, a generative force. So the moon carries with it all of those connotations. And the reflection of the moon on water is an image that's constant, that's often used for enlightenment. Us being the water. The Buddha Dharma, reality being reflected on us. Now, the water reflects, of course, light, when it hits the interface between air and water, a certain proportion of it is reflected, and it depends on conditions. It depends on how high the moon is in the sky, but somewhere between 5–10% of the light, more or less, is reflected, and the rest of it goes into the water and is absorbed. But the full moon reflected on the water appears when the water is calm, when the water is still. And the darker the sky, the less the sort of the ambient light, the less the light pollution, the more likely you are to see the moon reflected on a lake, for instance. And of course, if there were lights at the bottom of the lake shining up, floodlights like you see in some swimming pools, that you would not see the moon reflected in water, because it would be overpowered by the light coming from the bottom of the lake. And David Brazier, who spoke with us about the Genjo Koan a few weeks back, makes much of this in saying that it's the darkness below the surface that allows the light to reflect. So turning down the ego, the self-center, sort of turning down the volume on that as low as it'll go, favors the reflection of the moon on the surface of the light. The moon does not get wet, nor is the water broken. And the rest of this paragraph, although its light is wide and great, the moon is reflected even in a puddle an inch wide. But he comes back to, the moon does not get wet, nor is the water broken. Enlightenment does not divide you, just as the moon does not break the water. You cannot hinder enlightenment, just as a drop of water does not hinder the moon in the sky. Some people mention comfort, reassurance, peacefulness. I think Dogen is trying to reassure us that we're not going to break it. You can't break the Dharma, and the Dharma is not going to break you. So if you encounter fear, as one might, in hearing about no self, no ego, what? This is Dogen reassuring us that we're going to be okay. It's okay. You can allow this to happen, enlightenment. You can be calm, still, and allow the Dharma to be reflected in you without fear of breaking it. In the early days of computers, some of you may remember, um, there was people had to reassure you that there's no combination of keystrokes that's going to break this thing. You may get endlessly lost in the software, but you're not going to break the computer that you just spent, however many thousands of dollars for, by anything that you do with the keyboard. So relax. You're not going to break it. And it won't break you. And although the light is wide and great, the moon is reflected even in a puddle an inch wide. The whole moon and the entire sky are reflected in dewdrops on the grass, and even in one drop of water. The depth of the drop is the height of the moon. Each reflection reflects the entire moon. So no matter how great or small one might be, or one might perceive oneself to be, no matter how great or small one is in worldly terms, which depends on conditions often that we have no control over, it doesn't matter, because the entire moon is reflected regardless of size, whether it's a puddle an inch wide or the Great Lakes. And also there's reassurance about each reflection, however long or short its duration, manifests the vastness of the dewdrop. So even if it's just a glimmer, even if, and I think it's my belief that we all have such glimmers. And sometimes they're very short, sometimes a little longer. And usually by the time we recognize it, it's over. But when we're wholeheartedly in the swim of things, taking care of our life, doing what need be done, or not doing, no matter how short, no matter how long, the full height of the moon is reflected. And realizes the limitlessness of the moonlight in the sky. Which is always available. One person commented about a supportive universe. And I think that is reflected in this passage as well. In so many ways, Dogen is just saying, it's going to be okay. Now earlier, he said, nevertheless, blossoms fall and weeds spread. And the Buddha is very careful to remind us again and again that there will be, if you live long enough, old age, sickness, death. There will be separation from the beloved. There will be association with the unbeloved. There will be not getting what you want. And there will be recurring grasping. It's our nature. But despite all that, and through all that, and with all that, there is this limitless moonlight, this supportive universe, and it will be okay. So, I would like to conclude by sharing one other thing. And this is a poem by Holcomb, who lived about, I guess about 500 years after Dogen, a Zen teacher, very well known, Holcomb. And he did this little drawing, little painting with a brush, and composed the poem to go along with it. He would, of course, been familiar with Dogen's writing and with the whole literature about moon reflections. The monkey is reaching for the moon in the water. Until death overtakes him, he'll never give up. If he'd let go of the branch and disappear in the deep pool, the whole world would shine with dazzling purity. So, I think we'll stop there and break up into smaller groups. What about this passage of Dogen's, or perhaps this poem, resonates with you? How do you not just the feeling tone, but trying to get your mind around it? And does it seem true? Is it in accord with your experience? I think I'll stop at that.